welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. One random small piece of housekeeping is I managed to finish watching a television series that, well, actually it's an HBO series. I don't know if it aired on television. Maybe it did. I don't know. But it is the show The Plot Against America. It's a show that takes place during an alternate history where Charles Lindbergh wins the presidency over FDR in the 1940 election. I think it's a really interesting series. I really liked it. And a couple of issues with it, but you'll find out what those are in the video that I will make of it, because that's the only reason I watched the series, is to make a video. I originally wanted to avoid the series like a plague, because I actually had an idea very similar to the concept of the show. You know, basically, like we all know, there are a lot of pieces of historical fiction that take place during like the 30s and 40s America that basically deal with issues of like fascism and certain political figures like Huey Long, Charles Lindbergh, usually trying to pinpoint like, oh, one of these two is going to lead like a fascist revolution in America or whatever. And this was like, and The Plot Against America was like the most recent one that was out. So recent that when I originally thought about it, I didn't even know it existed. Most of the ones that I knew were either like books from like before the 2000s, or Kaiserreich. I haven't even played Kaiserreich. I just know that there were a ton of people that are like super obsessed with Kaiserreich. It's one of those weird towing the lines. It's like, are they into history or are they into history? And luckily I did find out that there wasn't really much to worry about. My series and this series can coexist peacefully. In fact, funnily enough, watching the series, I actually legitimately got more invigorated to make mine, even though it's very unlikely to happen. But, you know, I mean, dreamers can dream, am I right? There's technically another piece of housekeeping for this channel that is really important, but at this point, you either know or you don't. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. The first news story is coming from our good old pals in Nicaragua. They are really just not letting up. Nicaragua silences its last outspoken critics, Catholic priests. He was the most prominent voice of protest in Nicaragua, using his pulpit to denounce the government's detention of opponents and suppression of civic rights. Then last week, the government came for him. Bishop Rolando Alvarez was arrested after the police raided his residence and put him under home confinement, and 8 of his companions in jail. The shocking arrest of Bishop Alvarez on Friday, the most senior clergyman to be detained in Latin America for political views in decades, was the latest and most aggressive move by Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega against the Roman Catholic Church. Until now, it was the only institution that had escaped his control after 15 years of uninterrupted rule. But as Mr. Ortega, 76, last year began the purge, the few remaining dissidents in politics, civil society, news media, academia, business, and culture, the Catholic churches in this deeply religious Central American nation assumed an increasingly pivotal role. More than sources of spiritual solace, they became the only places in the country where citizens could speak their minds and listen to speakers who were not appointed by the state. Now, as an anti-theist, based, but also it's like, dude, come on, like, Ortega, literally, there's nothing left. I don't the fact that there are people, like, and I can't even say this because, like, it's, of course some people are gonna stand this. But, like, no matter what you have to say about socialism or anything of the sort, it's like, Ortega is objectively a bad leader. Ortega is objectively a despot. Let's count, shall we? Here are all the people who ran for president in the last presidential election at one point. Daniel Ortega, Walter Espinoza, Guillermo Osorio, Gerson Gutierrez, Mercurio Urey, Marcelo Monti, Cristina Barrios, Juan Sebastian Chamara, Milton Arcia, Arturo Cruz Jr., Luis Flay, George Enriquez, Medero Marena, Felix Maradiaga, Miguel Mora, Oscar So Balvado, and Noel Vidare. Okay, that's 17 people, including Ortega. So here's what happened. Noel was arrested, Oscar was suspended, Miguel was arrested, Felix was arrested, Maradero was arrested, Flay was arrested, Cruz was arrested, Arquilla is arrested, Chamorro was arrested, and Barrios were arrested. Like, they all were either arrested, resigned, exiled, whatever. Like, the only ones, and George Enriquez, coincidentally, like, he wasn't chosen to be the nominee of, like, a massive unity campaign, so he was out of contention to begin with. And those other ones I mentioned, they don't have, like, this is the thing. Here's another thing that you should notice. All of the ones that were arrested or exiled, they have Wikipedia pages. And all the ones who remained candidates in the race don't have Wikipedia pages. Now you might say, well, what does that matter? Think about it. The people who are running for president of a country don't have Wikipedia pages. That should probably give you an indication that these people are not really more well-known within the nation. And they were the only people who could threaten his power. Like, let's look at the vote totals. Daniel Ortega got 75% of the vote. The next runner-up, Walter Espinoza, got 14%. The election before that, Ortega got 72%, and the opponent got 15%. Okay, now let's look at the election before that. Okay, so let's see, 62% to the top candidates, to the top opposition candidates, 31%. Okay, see, first off, right out of the bat, top opponent, and as you can tell, it's a bit more even. 2006, when Ortega first ran for the president in this reign of his power, because he was president before and then he came back to power, the first election, 38% to 29%. Now let's take a look at the elections before, like, pretty close. 56 of a different person, and Ortega got 42%. Like, the U.S. was so afraid of him back in the 80s. They were afraid that Daniel Ortega was going to be a despot, considering, like, the 1984 election had, like, 66% to 14%. And then in the 1990 election, they were like, oh, is Daniel Ortega a despot? And no, because he lost. Daniel Ortega doesn't have to be this way. Daniel Ortega, he used to be, I don't even know if all the history of Daniel Ortega, but he was, like, at the very least, like an actual human being who had principles. But Ortega, like, everybody said this in Nicaragua, Ortega is the person if past Ortega was in the country, he would be on the front lines trying to take down this Ortega. Dude isn't even a socialist. Like, you can't even pretend like, oh, well, at least he's running his country good, because he's been running his country terribly. Like, the thing that led to those people getting potential power to get rid of Ortega was because Ortega pushed for a extremely unpopular measure that led to large swaths of violence. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm not exactly a fan of Ortega, and this is clearly just another step in his reign, because, like, that's the thing. Ortega, he used to be an avowed atheist, and then he became, like, a super Catholic guy in order to try to win voters, and that was, like, the first step in his downfall, because, like, he was all of a sudden, like, running a super socially conservative thing, and now he still has that, but now he's clearly going to try and position that as, like, a different type of thing. Ortega is literally just, like, he's just crap. So anyway, speaking of Latin America and crap, we're going to be talking about some other crap that happened in Latin America. In Argentina, a prosecutor seeks a 12-year jail term for former president Cristina Fernandez Kirchner. Basically, what was happening was that Cristina Kirchner has been on trial since 2019 for allegedly defrauding the state and involvement in a scheme to divert public funds during her 2 terms as president. And originally, like, it was alleged that, like, originally the idea was that she shouldn't be sent to jail, but then now apparently people are pushing for this case again, because, like the point in Argentina is that apparently it's against the law. It's like one of those things, like, in the United States. The United States people, like, can we try a sitting president? I don't know. That's why we have the impeachment thing, so we can try sitting leaders. And that's basically what they're trying to do with Cristina Kirchner. Now, Kirchner has basically denied all of these allegations, of course, and she stated that the reason, like, she's saying that this is truly just like a political persecution, like they did with Lula in Brazil. But it's like one of those things where it's like, again, similar to Brazil and Lula, it's like technically there could be actual things that could have been went wrong, but it's also like very convenient that you're bringing up the case now, because many people are saying like there's some people who I don't know if people are trying to oppose this and like saying like, oh, why would people pretend this is like some political persecution? There's no way this is political persecution. But the thing is, here's the truth. In 2023, Argentina is going to be holding a presidential election. And guess who has been floated around as a potential candidate for the Frente de Todos? You guessed it, the incumbent president, Alberto Fernandez. But since Alberto Fernandez is kind of not doing so hot, many people in his coalition have floated the idea of Cristina Kirchner being their nominee. And poll-wise, she's been doing the best of the left-wing candidates, so many people are saying it's time for Kirchner 3.0. I mean, it kind of stinks that the Argentinian left can't really grow past old figures. It's kind of a big problem with a lot of these Latin American countries that I really hope that at least Mexico kind of outgrows. Because it's like, a lot of times, it's like, they really can't grow out of these, of certain figures. And that will usually lead to their downfall. Like, think about it. In Brazil, their only hope is to renominate Lula. Why is he the only hope? Like, this isn't going to be a crutch they can rely on forever. Eventually, Lula and Kirchner and AMLO and, what are some other people? Evo. Like, these people will not last forever. Venezuela learned that the hard way. They just kept running Chavez over and over and over again. But Chavez died. The original plan for Argentina was that it was going to be Nestor Kirchner, and then Cristina Kirchner, and then Nestor Kirchner. But then that plan didn't work out. Evo Morales basically tried to stay in office for a while longer than he should have. And that almost led to Bolivia having a massive downfall because he refused to let power go. And yes, you could say they're doing it for good reason, but it's like, yeah, but you need to understand, at one point, they're going to have to give up the mantle. Eventually, these countries are going to have to move on with that. Like Bolivia. In Bolivia, there's polls that are out for the next election, and Evo Morales is the one being suggested as the mass candidate. Evo, I love you, man, but you gotta let the power go. These guys, they gotta learn. Like, and that's actually a thing that I think it's great that Mexico has this law that they can't run for re-election. AMLO can't make it all about him. AMLO will literally have to kiss power goodbye at the end of his term. And that's why he's pushing so hard for Morena to be strong without him. It's why he's uplifting leaders like Mario Delgado and Claudia Sheinbaum, the young new faces. But anyways, I've rambled on this topic enough. Let's move on to the good old US of A to see what's up. Joe Biden is going to be canceling up to $20,000 of student loan debt per borrower. The president also announced a continuation of the freeze on student loan payments until January. President Joe Biden on Wednesday announced a cancellation of up to $20,000 in student loan debt for certain borrowers, belatedly following through on a campaign promise that has remained top priority for progressive Democrats. Biden also announced a continuation of the freeze on student loan payments until January. The payments were originally paused by Donald Trump in response to the coronavirus pandemic, and Biden extended it up to August 31st, but he extended it again to December or January. Roughly 45 million student loan borrowers collectively owe $1.6 trillion. As many of the 43 million borrowers could benefit from the plan, the White House said Wednesday, and 20 million could see their debt completely canceled. Many people point out it's not good enough, Biden needs to do more, but here's the thing, here's the true thing that many people keep forgetting. It's like, of course Biden wasn't going to do it. Biden wasn't going to give you, I keep saying this over and over, but like, I'm sick and tired of the progressives who sat there and bitched and moaned and was like, Joe Biden isn't going to do all these big things. He's not going to cancel student loan debt for everybody. He's not going to give us Medicare for all. He's not going to pass the Green New Deal, blah, blah, blah. Like, and they say this over and over and over again, and it's like, okay. And then, when he doesn't do it, they complain. I'm the only one who's consistent. I said he wasn't going to do it, and now I'm not complaining that he isn't doing the thing that I know he's not going to do. like, I mean, there's not much more I could say. It's like, I guess it's good that he's doing this, but I mean, again, it could be better, but I mean, you take your W's where you can, and you take your L's where you can. I'm not really winning or losing with Biden, so it doesn't really matter. Like, most people shouldn't be complaining. Biden literally did the one thing that he said he was going to do, get rid of Donald Trump. He did get rid of Donald Trump. That was his one campaign promise that everybody knew. That was the only reason they were voting for him. So you shouldn't be complaining that he's not doing the things that you want him to do when you knew for a fact he wasn't going to do that to do. Okay, first we're going to move on to election news. But not the ones you may think at first. First, we're going to have to talk about the Alaska election. Remember that? Well, because apparently there's been an update in the Alaska election. Well, for those who don't know, Alaska, they were holding the special election, like the final round of the special election. Well, not the final round, but like the ranked choice voting votes. They held that the same day they held the primary for the main general election. And an interesting thing happened. You see, the same people who reached the top were the ones who reached the top. Mary Sattler Peltola, Sarah Palin, Nick Begich III, and Tara Sweeney. Like, those were the four people who technically made it to the last one. I mean, because the last one had Al Gross drop out, and then Tara was supposed to go to the top, but then due to the fact that they withdrew too late, she wasn't able to get on. So in the first idea of the 4-person ranked choice voting final thing, it didn't even pan out because it has 3 people. But anyways, this one seemingly was about to go off without a hitch. But then, out of nowhere, Tara Sweeney announced that she would be dropping out of the race, citing the fact that she didn't see a path to victory in the ranked choice voting like thing. I guess the idea would be that she knew that she was going to be most people's like first choice and then be gone. Like, to be honest, like legitimately, there really wasn't any path for her at all. Most people knew that Sarah Palin would probably be the most generic, like Republican second or third choice. But I mean, I guess she didn't really see most people voting for her as the second choice or first that much. She wasn't. It was pretty clear that she was going to be the last one. All the Democrats were going to coalesce around Sattler Peltola. Sarah Palin would basically get all the conservative Republicans and maybe some people who are like to the right of the Republicans. And Nick Begich would basically get whoever was in between them, because he's the child of a prominent Democratic family, but it's like a Republican and Democratic family, but like he was basically the moderate in the race, I guess. And Tara saw no chance of her winning. But what's interesting is that due to the fact that she dropped out, she didn't be stupid like Al Gross. She actually dropped out very early on. So now the 5th place candidate will be moving on to the general election instead. And that 5th place candidate is Chris Bai, the top vote getter of the Libertarian Party. He wasn't the only Libertarian Party candidate. There was J.R. Myers, who was a prominent paleoconservative, like right-wing populist candidate that has mostly stayed to like minor parties. But you know, he's generally, I guess there's really not much else to say. Libertarian actually manages to get on the final ballot, showing the Libertarian Party is really strong in Alaska. Most people don't remember that. So anyways, now it is time to get on to the elections that happened on the 23rd. Both New York and Florida had very high-profile races, and we're going to talk about a couple of them. Not all of them, because really we don't care about all of them. Mostly focusing on the ones that I had a horse in the race in, and also the ones that were otherwise prominent in the race. You know, if it was a governor race or like a Senate race that happened, even if I wasn't backing anybody, I'd probably talk about it. But remember, these are just the primaries, so obviously general elections don't matter. But anyways, first, Florida, and we're going to start with the Florida governor race. Known closeted Republican Charlie Crist won, and when I say closeted Republican, I mean in both ways. Crist is literally well known for being like very obviously gay, and he refuses to acknowledge it. even though there is a documentary literally titled, I forget what it's called. It's called like Uncloseted or something along those lines. And it's like a documentary about a bunch of gay men in the Washington, D.C. area that basically openly talk about their relationships with the senators and the officials there. But I also say closet Republican because Crist, even though he has previously served as a Republican elected official, is actually running as the Democratic nominee because he's been a Democrat for... around 2014 was when he became a Democrat. Even though he's basically kept all of his Republican positions, but he's now a Democrat. And most people are saying that this is literally the worst option that he could have made. And by some people, I mean me, because Crist hasn't been able to win a statewide election since before the year 2010. In 2010, he ran for Senate as an independent and lost to Marco Rubio. Then in 2014, he ran as the Democratic governor's nominee against Rick Scott, which he also lost. The only reason that people say they backed Crist was because they just recognized his name on the ballot. Florida also held a Senate race. Unsurprisingly, William Sanchez lost. Basically the same thing that happened in North Carolina happened in this seat. All of the big name people basically were given the chance to run for a House seat instead of running for the Senate seat. And I'm going to spoil it here, they all lost. Alan Grayson lost in Florida District 10. Keith Russell lost in whatever district he ran in. And Alan Ellison lost in District 23. Ellison was the only one I was rooting for, but it does kind of stink that Sanchez didn't even get second, he got third. In North Carolina, the random guy I voted for at least had the decency to get second place. Speaking of Florida District 10, we actually got some good news. Maxwell Frost won his seat. He's going to be, potentially, the first Gen Z member of Congress. Now, apparently, this depends on your definition of what Gen Z is. You see, most people say Gen Z begins at, 19... Like, most people say it begins at, like, the late 90s. Like, 97, which is when I think Frost was born. But some people say that it begins in 1995, which is when Madison Cawthorn won. But I would heavily argue that Frost is probably the first Gen Z member of Congress. Logistically, it just doesn't make any sense because, Cawthorn is 27. He feels nothing like my generation. Meanwhile, Frost is 25. Literally the constitutional age to run for Congress. I think he's going to beat Cawthorn's youngest member to be sworn in. I don't remember. At least for now. Because I just looked it up and youngest member, the person who's serving Congress was around 22. And it's yikes. But this was in the 1800s, so vastly different time period. And lastly, Florida District 20, Sheila Cheerfulness McCormick won re-election. Now, I originally didn't really include incumbents because they're mostly guaranteed to win, but given certain incumbents have lost, I should probably be mentioning incumbents very frequently. So anyways, now moving on to New York. New York State Senate seat 59, Kristen Gonzalez actually won. Fuck you, no Mickey Const. The fact that you even entered the race was very troubling. In New York District 3, Melanie Durango lost. Pretty unfortunate. But, interestingly, the person that ended up winning is, this guy. He's, this really old gay guy. And he's, for some reason, I think that's going to be a topic for a future episode. Because, I'm noticing this weird trend with certain progressive candidates that it's, maybe we're seeing new factions of the Democratic Party form before our very eyes. Or be formed. Or reformed. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. But it's we're seeing a lot of progressives, or people who claim to be progressives, or people who run with progressive positions, but definitely are not progressive by any means. They're not really faux aggressives, but it's maybe a new branch of the Democrats. I don't know. But this guy, Robert Zimmerman, he run, his website seems to be progressive, but it's of course, pro-Israel stance and quite a number of other things. The fact that he's endorsed by Hillary Clinton should give you an indication he's not really progressive, but I'm just saying this is a trend I'm seeing Robert Zimmerman probably doesn't even qualify for this trend. I'm talking more people like Valerie Fouché and Morgan McGarvey. I'm going to skip over one race for now. We'll come back to it. New York District 11, Brittany Ramos de Barrios lost. In New York District 12, the Democrat v. Democrat incumbent bid with Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney was originally seen as like this really big one, but it was not a very close race at all. In fact, Jerry Nadler very easily beat Carolyn Maloney. In New York District 14, AOC wasn't even running in a primary. She was unopposed. In New York District 16, Jamal Bowman won. In New York District 17, Alessandra Biaggi lost. And in New York District 19, Josh Riley won. So yeah, pretty mixed results for those. But the biggest race of the night was New York District 10. New York District 10 was a very contentious seat, all things considered. So basically, for those who don't remember, let me give you a brief summary of what happened. You see, there was once a member of Congress by the name of Mondaire Jones. He ran in a district named the District 17. And in this district, he was running against an incumbent, but the incumbent dropped out. And then he managed to win the open seat. And Mondaire Jones ended up becoming a pretty decently progressive member of Congress. He was one of the first gay black men to be elected to Congress. And everybody was all hunky-dory. But then one day, good old Mondaire received a bad piece of news. Even though he was all ready to run in New York District 17, something happened that made a lot of people mad. Redistricting happened because the districts that were drawn were not exactly fair. The New York Democratic Party only raised the problem very late, so they had to quickly redraw some districts, which put a lot of seats into somewhat worrisome territory. A lot of states were shifted from blue to toss-up, so people were afraid what's going to happen. And one of the people who ended up being incredibly afraid was a member of Congress by the name of Sean Patrick Maloney, who's like the head of the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He's basically in charge of how Democrats run ads. He's basically in charge of where all the money goes, all that kind of stuff. He made the announcement that instead of running in his District 18, because that one was drawn to be a little bit more competitive, he would instead run in District 17. If you may notice, that is the district that Mondaire was in. And shock of all shocks, Mondaire Jones now had to be put in a position where he either had to announce that he would be running against the DCCC chair, or he would have to run in another district. Luckily, people thought the decision was made very easy for him, because he was actually drawn out of his district, and was drawn into District 16, which, if you don't remember, was the district of Jamal Bowman. But there was also potential that he could have been living in an area near District 15, the district of Richie Torres, the other gay black man that was elected to Congress. And it was made not that secret that people who were close to Mondaire were pressuring him to run against Jamal Bowman, many of which were former allies of Eliot Engel, the congressman before Jamal Bowman. And many people even went a step further to claim that they were trying to pressure Mondaire Jones and Jamal Bowman to run against each other so that they could make the way for a corporate candidate to squeeze into the race. I personally don't think that that was the plan. The plan would have just been to back Mondaire Jones, because Mondaire Jones is no DSAer. There are a lot of people who keep saying Mondaire Jones is an evil DSAer, when he's in fact not a DSAer. He's never been affiliated with DSA, he is not a member of DSA, he more than likely will never be a member of DSA. In fact, he's not even like that big of a fire stepper. He was basically like more of a nice progressive. The squad are more like the people that are like, you know, no nonsense, we'll stand our ground no matter what. But Mondaire Jones was more of a peace guy, I guess. So Mondaire Jones was put in a bit of a bind. He could either A, run in New York District 17, or B, run in New York District 16. Mondaire Jones made a very interesting choice and selected C, run in New York District 10, a district that he was incredibly far away from. He tried to justify his reasoning for the fact that that was the same district where the Stonewall riot happened. For those who don't know, Stonewall was a gay rights activism riot that happened back in the 70s. And of course, Monday Jones ran a lot of ads basically like, so see, this is where Stonewall began, and this is where they're going to send a gay congressman. And that was a big deal. However, there was a problem. Monday Jones basically tried to pull a Sean Patrick Maloney to people in this district, because there were a lot of people who would be considered progressives who were already planning on running in this area. Bill de Blasio, Carlina Rivera, and most prominently, Yuh-Line. Each had differences and similarities, but at the end of the day, most of the progressive vote consolidated around Yuh-Line. I personally didn't back her because I felt that since John Darrell Jones was technically an incumbent, of course, technically he wasn't necessarily the incumbent in this race, but the fact that he was an incumbent congressman, I felt that it would be better for him to run and win. But, I was like, Monday Jones was doing a fine job. There was no reason to, replace him. And Yuh-Line was a Warren Dem. She backed her over Bernie in 2020, so I definitely had some suspicions. But, if she won, I wouldn't have complained. Most people didn't really complain. Though, it was basically the same principle as the New York 59 race. Jones was in it first, so I backed him. And it was the same with Maxwell Frost. If Alan Grayson had announced earlier, I might have been backing him. But Frost was the first progressive. Was he? No, he was, that's a different tangent. But we're focusing on New York District 10. Many people, such as myself, were a little bit worried about the fact that there were so many progressives running in the race. Many people saying spoiler effect or whatever. Personally, I'm not, me, I'm not really a spoiler effect kind of guy, but I just generally like the idea of progressives working together to beat, the corporate establishment candidates. I'm just generally more in favor of that than just all of us running against each other and, fighting. But each of them had, differences in, how they ran their campaign and how they would be. But what ended up happening is a right-wing Democrat by the name of Dan Goldman managed to win. Shocker. He managed to win. But the thing is, he didn't win by that much of a margin. He won by, it was 20... according to this website, it says 25.76 to 23.75. And people point out the fact that the two other progressives in the race, Monday Jones and Carlina Rivera, got relatively the same amount of votes, around, mid-teen votes. 18, 17, 16, that kind of stuff. And maybe, of course, in any sort of other system, ranked choice voting, or if any of those two decide to drop out and back Yuh-Line, especially considering Yuh-Line-Yo's election would actually be very notable due to the fact that she would, I think, be the first, at least on record, member of Congress to be on the spectrum. That would be interesting. I think that would be quite an endeavor, but seemingly that's not going to happen because Yuh-Line lost. And basically, immediately after she lost, AIPAC basically revealed, we were the reason she lost. We spent tons of money on this race. And, of course, when people point this out, then people are going to go, again with the anti-Semitism. It's if you want to stop the... AIPAC is literally just admitting that they bought the race. Are you kidding? AIPAC literally admitted they bought the race against Yuh-Line. And everybody is mad at somebody. Some people are mad at Dan Goldman. Some people are mad at AIPAC. Some people are mad at Carlina Rivera. Some people are mad at Monday Jones. Some people are mad at Bill de Blasio. Some people are mad at Yuh-Line. Very few people are mad at Yuh-Line. Basically, everybody is mad at Sean Patrick Maloney. They're mad at everybody. And it's everybody deserves some portion of the blame. Yes, Carlina Rivera and Monday Jones, maybe they should have seen the writing on the walls and dropped out. But the thing is, apparently, there weren't that many polls that were being conducted, and many of them basically flip-flopped to which progressive was in the lead. So, the only the couple, two recent polls showed Yuh-Line winning. Not necessarily winning, but, in the winning of the progressives. Though, to be fair, I have a conspiracy theory that Monday Jones was basically openly signaling people to back Yuh-Line because, there was a press conference and Yuh-Line was in the front and Monday Jones was in the back. So it's I think Monder Jones is indicating something here. But, like, everybody is mad at somebody. Like, Monder Jones, yes, he may be, to be fair, like, I will admit, Monder, he should have been a bit more conscientious of his decision. Though I also admit, like, what do you expect him to do? The man doesn't know how to primary somebody. So he was scared. He didn't know what to do. And most people are saying that this race is basically a shit show. But there's actually a glimmer of hope. And the fact that this glimmer of hope is being mentioned by people who are not me gives an indication that this might be a glimmer of hope we should look into. You see, because almost immediately after she lost, there were a decent number of people who were saying that Yuh-Line, since she was effectively robbed of the race, she should run in the general election as the Working Families Party candidate. And now, normally this is just like one of those weird things that's like random lefties on Twitter say, and it's like, okay, whatever. But then, some prominent individuals started echoing this idea. Cynthia Nixon started echoing this, and even floating a donation link saying, donate money now if you want her to run as the Working Families Party nominee. Yuh-Line is even apparently in contact with Monder Jones, who may or may not have the Working Families Party ballot line. I don't know, Jerry's still out on that. But effectively, like, she's talking to the Working Families Party, and she's talking to Monder Jones, and saying, would you actually be interested in the idea of me running in the general election as a Working Families Party candidate? And you know me, I 100%, 1 million%, 1 sextillion, million, gajillion, Google, billion, Googleplex % behind this idea. I 100% say progressives need to like break off from the Democratic Party. Like, I legitimately want Yuh-Line to not only run and win as the Working Families Party candidate, but I don't want her to switch her party affiliation back to Democrat. I want her to remain a member of the Working Families Party throughout her entire tenure of Congress. I want all this to be done. And there's actually a small glimmer of hope, at least for one aspect of this. Not all the aspects that I want, but there's at least one interesting aspect that happens, because Yuh-Line actually got her New York career started running as the Working Families Party candidate in the New York Assembly 65 special election. So that gives an indication that Yuh-Line might actually run as the Working Families Party nominee in November. And as I said, 1 million% on board. Yuh-Line for Working Families Party candidate. Let's go. So anyways, now that we've gone through that basically entire legend, let's move on to the main topic of this video. I wonder if the main topic is actually going to be as long as the beginning. This is going to be one of those ones. So, as you read by the title, this is going to be a thinky episode. That's kind of a weird... Is that really what the title of this sub-series is going to be? The thinky episodes? Whatever, I guess I can live with that. As the title suggests, I'm going to use this video to explain to you all why I am not an anarchist. The reason why I'm making this video is basically because the last one of the series of this that I did, it didn't necessarily pan out so well, because I asked the question, why am I not a socialist? But that has clearly changed, given the intro to this video. Maybe this is going to be the start of a brand new series. Literally, as I say that, I'm actually starting to look more into the idea and think, that might actually be an interesting subject. But if anything, this is going to be a heck of a lot of infrequent series, because I genuinely think that if you just watch any of my videos, you can probably indicate why I support and oppose X. And you could just point blank just ask me on Twitter, but I guess this is for if you want to see it in a full digestible video. I was debating which one to do. I would either do anarchism or communism. You see, as a lefty, I interact with a lot of anarchists and communists for both good and bad reasons. And these are two very growing ideologies on left tube, left Twitter, and that kind of stuff. Bread tube, I guess you could call it. But, like, why? Especially this one in particular. Like, the reason why I'm doing this one is just because this is the ideology that I truly don't grasp anybody buying into. Like, any other ideology I can kind of buy. I can understand why somebody would believe it. But anarchism truly just never quite... It was legitimate, like, one of the only ideologies that I would never consider actually being. Like, generally, like, let's just look into it. What is anarchism? The definition of anarchism: belief in the abolition of all government and the organization of society on a voluntary, cooperative basis without recourse to force or compulsion. There are, of course, a wide variety of anarchist thoughts. Most commonly, if you just put anarcho in front of any ideology you can think of, you basically get an actual ideology that exists, for better and for worse. Whether it be one of those real ideologies like anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-capitalism, or one of those incredibly fake ideologies like anarcho-fascism or anarcho-authoritarianism. However, believe it or not all anarchist ideologies have to have the anarcho in their name. Egoism, mutualism, even Marxism in its original state was anarchist. The idea would be that the state would be abolished and that everybody would run around and be like Marxists. They would share bread, share food, share clothes, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And since Marxism is sort of like the backbone of most left-wing political movements in the world, that technically means a form of anarchism is the backbone of most left-wing thought. And you could really see the appeal of anarchism, mostly through a philosophical lens. A lot of people think of the world as sort of like inherently anarchistic. Everybody, like, for whether or not you're a left-winger or right-winger, you do kind of see at least some degree of anarchism in your head. For left-wingers, they believe that everybody is truly good. Thus, if the way that system is now would be abolished, everybody would truly be good. Meanwhile, people on the right claim to be in favor of like individual liberty and individual freedoms, like these are not given to you by your government. So you can see the anarchist appeal there. I mean, anarchism is so appealing that most people have to spend a lot of their time demonizing anarchism. Like, whenever there's any sort of like a problem that you have and you think that the world's falling apart, like you immediately think like anarchy. Like, the world's falling apart, anarchy, everybody's going crazy, killing each other, no laws, no order. But of course, most people who are philosophically anarchists don't necessarily believe that. However, the thing about anarchism, like, all this sounds well and good, like, you know, philosophically, whatever, that kind of stuff. But there's just one big problem. If you're an anarchist right now, listen to this. Your ideology is not viable. Like, as much it is an interesting thought experiment, as much as it's an interesting philosophical viewpoint of the world, as much as blank, 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 realistically, your ideology has no viability. For the sake of this one, we'll be focusing mostly on the left-wing versions of anarchism. Though this technically does apply to a lot of right-wing versions of anarchism, depending on like what kind of right-wing version of anarchism. Because the left-wing versions of anarchism truly do have like big fundamental flaws. And it really all boils down to simply just one word. How? How do you enforce it? How do you get there? How? Like, how? Legitimately, how? We'll start with the how did they get there. Like, most anarchists will usually concede, like, obviously, like, their version of the world would be, like, a revolution. But it's like, where's the power to build that revolution? Like, I'm not seeing it. If you're an anarchist, like, there's one of the reasons why anarchists were originally so hated. There were some anarchists that were literally just like, yeah, let's just do that. And they were actually working really hard. One of them killed William McKinley. That guy was one step closer to getting an anarchist society than any of you, like, Twitter anarchists have been doing. And it's funny, because it's like, the anarchist society is like, we need to stop using force. And then how are you going to get that anarchist society? We have to use force. But I guess technically that's supposed to be the point, like, this is the final piece of force that you need to do. But then, of course, it technically wouldn't be the final piece, because first you'd have to overthrow the governments of the world, and then you'd have to use force to push the people who are currently in this society to go along with your particular version of anarchism. And then, of course, that's ignoring, like, the things that aren't in governmental control. That would, of course, be huge forces, like corporations, I guess technically state governments, that kind of stuff. And then a bigger question comes from the idea of, okay, then how do you keep it functioning? I mean, let's just look at the textbook definition of politics, since we did one of anarchism. Politics is the activities associated with the governments of society or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Anarchism basically just says, nah, we're not gonna do that. And then anarchists will explain like how their perfect world will be, but then they ignores kind of how like the real world pans out. Like, there's a reason why 99.9% of societies in the world have been states. Because that's how you function as society. But then, of course, you do get, like, that one or two, like, actual anarchist, I guess, technically societies or, like, countries. Like, again, but that's also, like, I guess it's a problem with me, because it's, like, I'm looking at the world through the lens of countries and states and societies, when anarchism literally is just, like, we want to get rid of that. And you can see the same thing of, like, when people argue against socialists. It's like, of course, I'm trying to argue against this system, and then they use the system to argue, even though I'm arguing against the system in its entirety. I'm basically doing the same thing to anarchists. I'm saying, like, the world we live in is, like, states and countries and governments. And I don't necessarily see how an anarchist society would work. But again, it's like, I'm saying, an anarchist society, technically anarchism would not be a society. The whole idea is that you're not a society. Like, really, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, without a state, without laws, how do you enforce any of your ideal society? Like, anarcho-syndicalist society is supposed to be a society based on unions, but it's like, how do you enforce that? If you don't have a society or a government to enforce the laws that would keep that society the way it is, how can you enforce that? Some people will try to say that's the argument people use against socialists. And while yes, technically people use that argument for socialism or communism, but for better and for worse, you can point to socialist societies and say, this is how it would work. You can point to the Pink Tide or the Scandinavian countries, or even to a degree, certain, like, other communist societies. Like, I mean, USSR, like, I mean, for better or for worse, for better and for worse, they were a viable economic and military force in the world scene. There's a reason why Vladimir Lenin created the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, because he had to figure out a way to implement Marxism in the real world. Marxism, anarchism, that sounds good on paper or in a speech or in a tagline, but truly, outside of an academic sense, or even like slightly base in your inner soul, you're not really going to get any far with that as you actually believe, like, oh, we're going to get an anarchist society. Like, if you actually believe that, you're not going anywhere. You're not getting anything accomplished. And this is where I'm going to have to give a really big hot take, and a lot of people are going to get really mad at this. But of all of the anarchist ideologies, the only one that really makes any sense and it could actually work is Anarcho-Capitalism, because they are the only anarchist ideology that fully admits what would happen in their society. They would abolish the government and big corporations would take over. They would be the new leaders in this world. I, of course, do not want that society, but of all the anarchist societies, that's the only one that technically could work. Or you would have to go like full like anarchist without principles, like Zahir from Korra. Zahir didn't have any sort of like big plans for like the future of the world. He legitimately just wanted people to be free to do whatever the heck they wanted. Again, his philosophy and the viewpoints that led him to that philosophy are interesting and well worth discussing, but I'm not running to Zahir to actually fix the world's problems. Another one, climate change. How the heck are you going to fix climate change when all of the world's governments are not existing? Now, of course, many people will say, oh, well, the government is one of the biggest polluters. It's like, okay, fair enough. But again, those corporations, what's going to happen next? But let's say, hypothetically, you manage to get past step one. You actually manage to not only abolish the government, but you actually somehow manage to rein in the corporations. They're not going to be an issue for your world anymore. Okay, how do you maintain the society that we currently live in now? We have a massive amount of infrastructure around the world. Most of it is controlled by the governments. What happens next? And when I say infrastructure, I don't just mean the roads. The reason you're listening to this episode right now is thanks to a lot of government grants and a lot of government oversight into technology that would eventually become PCs, microphones, that kind of stuff. The internet is maintained by basically every single government in the world. In a no-government world, what will happen next? PBS. How is that going to keep getting funded? with the government gone, no more money to go into it. Basically, every single inner city kid now doesn't have access to that educational TV anymore. And with that, we can kiss basically every single piece of welfare goodbye. Buddy, there's a reason why tax evasion is a crime, and why libertarians parade around the idea of taxation is theft. Because we know for a fact there are a lot of people, they will not fund any idea you have. They're not going to fund your little commune. They're not going to fund your little, like, grandma's healthcare thing. They're not going to do that. You have to enforce you have to put laws in place to make it so that they have to do that. And you can't use in this society there wouldn't be money, or in this society there wouldn't be anything, because it's unfathomable. Like, really, that is just so far off from how our reality is now that we just can't see it. But let's go hypothetical once more. Let's just say hypothetically, like, US, like, it works. Like, somehow you managed to pull it off. Like, I don't know how. You managed to pull it off somehow. The US has become whatever anarchist society you want. As such, everything in the state has been abolished. Like, everything. Military, DEA, welfare, whatever. You have your wonderful anarchist society where everybody's happy, la da da da, like everybody's all happy, hunky-dory. Okay, now the world's biggest superpower has just been removed from the world stage. Now it's time for Russia or China to step up to the plate. Russia decides Ukraine ain't enough. They start expanding. Russia decides, how about we take Japan now? And Korea. And the other Korea. And Vietnam. We'll just take all of them. Maybe Israel decides that one small section of land isn't enough. They want to expand. Silly me even thinking that if America was gone, Israel would have a fighting chance. That's ridiculous. Maybe many of these countries look at our land and go, ooh, no, later? We can just yeet that right now. Now, you can't say I'm fear-mongering, because these countries make stupid military decisions with the US government around. If they weren't, what the heck would they do next? Now, of course, you're going to see the anarchists go back to the comment section and go, no, but you see, we actually want the entire world to be an anarchist society. Literally, how in the heck are you going to accomplish that? The US becomes an anarchist society. How do they turn Mexico and Canada into anarchist societies now? You can't really invade and then force them to be anarchists, because it kind of goes against the whole idea of anarchism. But it's, again, like, one of the big problems. Anarchists never really get the hows. But let's give anarchists the benefit of the doubt. Let's say, hypothetically, they do it. I don't know how. I legitimately have no fathom of way that they did it. But they somehow did it. Every single country in the world is abolished. Every place is basically a little anarchist society. There are no governments, no problems, no whatevers. There's literally nothing wrong in the world. What stops one guy from getting a bunch of people together to form like a little society, government, whatever, and like form into their own little group? It's like, of course, at first, fine, that's anarchist, and they choose to make that decision. Okay, but then this guy decides, I don't want this anymore. You 6 followers of mine are kind of boring. Then his 6 followers start going around the area and start forcing them to follow him. And then that group turns into 12, and then that group turns into 24, then 48, then it just keeps going on, and, the cycle repeats. Now it's a new fascist leader. The truest problem with anarchism is that it is legitimately too kumbaya for any of it to be seriously taken into any sort of, actual whatevers. I legitimately can't take it seriously because you'd have to do so much. And I'm legitimately focused on what we can do now. I've seen other socialist societies function well and how they've done it. We can implement that very easily. Anarchism truly doesn't have that viable of a blueprint. And you really can't see it going far beyond whatever. So anyways, that's all I really have to say on that matter. To all the mad anarchists in the comment section, consider literally anything else. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if there's more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.